Imagine you wake up tomorrow and your investment account is down 20%. Not because you did anything wrong, not because you missed some secret warning. The economy is simply going through a rough period, and your screen is suddenly showing a number you never wanted to see. Now you have two choices. You can make a decision while you're scared, with a phone in your hand and 1,000 headlines competing for your attention. Or you can make the decision today while you're calm and let that decision control what happens tomorrow. That difference may be more important than choosing the perfect stock, finding the perfect fund, or predicting the next recession. Because successful investing is often less about knowing what happens next and more about knowing what you will do when you don't know. And that's the idea I want to explore today. Not how to predict the next crash, not how to copy billionaires, but how to build an investment system that still works when your emotions don't. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. Markets don't come with warning labels. You can have economists, analysts, financial models, corporate earnings reports, interest rate forecasts, and thousands of people watching the same data, and still disagree about what happens next. That's because markets are not machines with one predictable output. They're systems influenced by businesses, consumers, interest rates, expectations, politics, technology, credit conditions, and human behavior. So instead of asking, where will the market be 6 months from now? A more useful question may be, what decision would I regret making during a bad 6 months? That question changes the entire strategy. Suppose you have a portfolio designed around a long-term goal. Maybe you're saving for retirement, building wealth, or simply trying to create financial independence. You decide that your target allocation is 70% stocks and 30% bonds. Then stocks perform extremely well for several years. Your portfolio might gradually become 80% stocks without you making a conscious decision. Nothing feels wrong because the account is growing, but eventually the market falls and suddenly you realize your portfolio has more risk than you originally intended. That's where rebalancing becomes useful. Rebalancing isn't about predicting whether stocks will rise or fall tomorrow. It's about bringing your portfolio back toward a level of risk you previously decided was appropriate. You might choose to rebalance annually, or you might use predetermined percentage bands. The exact method matters less than having a method, because without one, investors can accidentally increase risk during good times and then discover that risk only after a decline. There's another important concept that doesn't get enough attention: liquidity. Two investors can own assets with similar long-term return potential, but experience completely different financial pressure. Imagine investor A has 6 months of essential expenses in an emergency fund. Investor B has almost everything invested and would need to sell investments to pay an unexpected medical bill, repair, or period of unemployment. If markets fall at the same time that investor B loses income, the problem isn't simply market volatility anymore. It's forced selling. And forced selling is different from choosing to sell. This is why an emergency reserve can play a role in an investment plan, even though cash itself may not produce the highest long-term return. The purpose of that reserve isn't necessarily to outperform stocks. Its purpose can be to give your investments time. That leads to another question. How much risk can you actually tolerate? People often answer this based on how they feel when markets are rising. That's not a reliable test. A better thought experiment is to imagine your portfolio losing 10%, then 20%, then perhaps 30%. Would you continue contributing? Would you rebalance? Would you need the money within the next year? Would a large decline force you to change your lifestyle? Your answers reveal something important. Risk isn't only about how much loss you can mathematically survive. It's also about how much volatility you can realistically tolerate without abandoning your plan. And there is a major difference between being financially capable of taking risk and being psychologically comfortable taking it. You need to understand both. Now let's talk about one of the most useful opportunities that can appear during a market decline: tax planning. For investors with taxable accounts, losses may sometimes have tax value. Depending on your situation and local rules, realizing an investment loss may allow you to offset certain gains, and some losses may potentially be carried forward. But this isn't a free money strategy. Tax rules can be complicated, and selling one investment and immediately replacing it with something substantially identical can create wash sale issues in the United States. Canada has its own rules, including the superficial loss rule, so investors shouldn't assume U.S. tax strategies automatically apply across the border. The broader lesson is more useful than any particular tax rule. A falling market can create financial decisions beyond simply asking, should I sell? Sometimes the better question is, are there legitimate tax or portfolio management opportunities here that fit my situation? That distinction can prevent emotional decisions. There's also another tool investors can use, although it requires discipline: automatic contributions. If you're still earning income and investing regularly, a market decline means your recurring contribution purchases more shares than it would have at higher prices. That doesn't mean every decline is automatically good. If you need the money soon, a falling market can be extremely damaging. But for someone with a long time horizon and a properly diversified portfolio, continuing a predetermined investment schedule can reduce the temptation to wait for a supposedly perfect entry point. And that brings us to one of the biggest traps in investing: confusing information with an advantage. You can watch financial television all day. You can follow interest rates, inflation, employment numbers, earnings announcements, geopolitical events, and market forecasts. But more information doesn't necessarily produce better decisions. Sometimes it produces more opportunities to change your mind. And changing your mind every time the news changes can become a hidden investment cost. Consider two investors. The first has a simple portfolio, an emergency reserve, a written allocation, automatic contributions, and a rule for rebalancing. The second follows markets constantly and changes positions whenever the economic outlook changes. The second investor may know more facts. But knowing more facts doesn't automatically mean making better decisions. The first investor has something arguably more valuable: fewer decisions to make. That's one reason a written investment policy can be surprisingly powerful. It doesn't have to be complicated. You could write down, what am I investing for? What percentage belongs in stocks, bonds, and cash? How often will I rebalance? What would cause me to change the plan? How much cash do I need outside the portfolio? When will I review the strategy? And perhaps the most important question, what information am I not going to react to? Because not every headline deserves an investment decision. There is also a subtle lesson here about time horizon. A 30-year-old saving for retirement and a 70-year-old withdrawing from a portfolio can experience exactly the same market decline, but have completely different problems. For the younger investor, lower prices may simply mean more shares are purchased through future contributions. For someone depending on portfolio withdrawals, selling after a large decline can potentially reduce the assets available for a future recovery. That's why portfolio design should connect to actual spending needs, not just an abstract risk score. Your investment strategy should answer a real-life question: how will I pay for my life if markets behave badly for a while? If you can answer that before the crisis arrives, you remove one major source of pressure. And here's the bigger picture. You don't need to know when the next recession begins. You don't need to identify the exact market bottom. You don't need to know which headline will dominate the financial news next month. Instead, you can focus on the variables that are actually within your control: your savings rate, your diversification, your fees, your taxes, your debt, your emergency reserves, your time horizon, your asset allocation, and most importantly, your behavior. None of these guarantees a particular investment result, but they can determine how prepared you are for a wide range of outcomes. So tonight, before the next scary headline arrives, open a blank document. Write down your target investment allocation. Write down when you will rebalance. Write down how much cash you actually need. Write down what would make you change your strategy and what would simply make you uncomfortable. Then save that document somewhere you can find it, because the goal isn't to become the person who always knows what's coming. That's probably an unrealistic goal. The goal is to become the person who doesn't need to know. Markets will rise, markets will fall. Some forecasts will be right and others will be wrong. And your job isn't to predict which one wins. Your job is to build a financial system that can survive uncertainty without forcing you to make your most important decisions at your most emotional moments. That's not a crystal ball. It's something much more practical: a plan.